Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Christoph Blecker, and this is the October 12th edition of the Kubernetes Public Steering Committee meeting. We have a pretty packed agenda today, but before we get into it, I'd like to remind everybody that this meeting and our community is subject to the Kubernetes and CNCF code of conduct, so please be excellent to each other. So I'm going to hop right into our first subject here, which is the steering committee election results. Excuse me. So changes in governance are always a critical time in any community of any size, and in ours in particular, they're very critical that when we choose the folks that are going to be making critical decisions, that we have like a solid process behind it. So first off, I'd like to thank our elections officers, Jay Singer-Demars, Josh Burkus, and Ihor, who conducted our election, made sure that everybody got the updates that they needed when they needed them. There's a lot of manual legwork that is done as part of the elections. So thank you very much for taking on that very important role in our community. So without further ado, I'd like to announce the three winners that will be taking the three currently vacant steering committee seats. So congratulations to Jordan Liggett, Bob Killen, and Dims, who will be rejoining us with the third seat. I'd also like to extend a congratulations and thank you to everybody that participated in this election. Whether or not you were a successful candidate or not, we had an incredible slate of candidates, people from all corners of our community, and the elections process is made better by having such a wide-ranging slate of candidates kind of participate in the election. We had roughly the same amount of voter turnout as we had last year, percentage-wise. We'll also be, in the coming days and weeks, the elections officers will be putting up a bunch of the raw voting data and that kind of stuff for transparency reasons. So with that, we will keep rolling through the agenda. So I'm going to rearrange the agenda a little bit. So knocking on that previous issue, Nikita, you mentioned about the retro for the election. I'd like to tackle that next.
Yeah, I was going to talk about, so we need to create an election, we need to have a meeting for the election retro. I know we had a lot of things we wanted to talk about there, things that we discussed in the previous retro that we probably also wanted to incorporate in the next election. So I wanted the retro to be scheduled in the next couple of weeks if possible, and get the changes in after the retro instead of waiting for the next election. And I can take the task of creating the doodle and figuring out the scheduling and stuff, but I'd like to get that going if that works for everyone.
That would be fantastic. And I'd like to.
Yeah, as soon as
Sorry, go ahead, Nikita.
I'll take up the task of creating an issue in the steering repo and follow up from there.
Great. And I'd like to make sure that we extend that invite to the retro to everyone involved in the election. So not just the elections officers, but also If you are a member of the steering committee, a previous member of the steering committee, a candidate for election, if you have any feedback on any part of the process, please participate in the retro and provide that feedback either in written form or come to the meeting or something like that, as you know, anything that we can learn to make this process better would be beneficial. It can only enhance our community, especially again in these like sensitive, important, critical governance changes. Okay. Any other comments on the election or the retro before we move on? Okay. So the next thing we've got on the agenda, sorry, Dims?
Yeah, I would like to thank all the candidates. There was a lot of energy this time. So I was really glad to see all the positive vibes towards the community, towards the election. So well, we'll talk more about it in the retrospective for sure, but we should figure out a way to harvest some of these energies going forward as well, and make sure that we are able to invite people in.
Sounds great. Okay, so next thing on our agenda is the working group reliability charter. There is a linked PR in the agenda doc. Wojtek, are you on the line?
Yes, I can cover that. I'm not sure, like I can
Perfect.
go over it and describe what is there, or do you prefer, or do you maybe already have some questions or concerns, or?
Maybe if you can give us like a 2 to 3 minute like brief summary
Sure.
of like what you view are the goals of working group reliability,
Sure.
and then we can get into if any of the steering committee folks have questions.
Sure. So basically the goal or the mission for the group itself should be ensuring that our users can run Kubernetes in production in a
I think we may have lost Wojtek there.
Oh no, internet.
like reliable way and stable scope for that is defining what for Kubernetes, measuring it.
Hey,
It
wait,
will
Zach.
probably be, yep.
Sorry, we lost you there for a moment.
Sorry.
Would you mind starting back over? We lost
Sure.
you kind of at the beginning, and you had like a 30-second outage.
Oh, sorry. So what we are planning to have in scope for the group is basically first defining what reliability really means for Kubernetes and how we should be measuring it. How I would envision that is that we will define a set of SLOs that kind of, if satisfied, will mean that like the Kubernetes is reliable, but it's like the exact details are to be done. The next thing is like measuring reliability in tests, and based on that, like providing a criteria for blocking the release if the reliability bar isn't really met for a given release. And then like also providing or getting a survey of like end users to understand what kind of outages and issues related to reliability they are facing. And based on that, and based on like our own knowledge, what are potential like outages or gaps, creating and prioritizing list of like necessary reliability investments that should happen. And finally, like based on that list, like working with relevant SIGs for delivering both the infrastructure that are needed to address those things like, for example, some testing infrastructure like upgrade tests or like chaos tests or something like that, as well as like working in individual SIGs on like specific improvements. Mostly like what I envision is that we won't be like, what is out of scope is like designing or executing like of individuals that are clearly falling into like individual SIGs charter. Like I can imagine that like the best example is probably priority and fairness, like which is clearly a reliability improvement and is happening now, but it clearly also falls into like SIG API machinery charter. So what like this group will be focusing more is the potential improvements that are like cross-cutting multiple SIGs. And I think hopefully this part is not super controversial. Well, okay, so maybe let's move into deliverables now, because like it's pretty connected. So I think I mentioned most of that in like when talking about scope, but to make it explicit, so the expected deliverables are like first document defining what reliability means, then like the list of known outages and failure modes, list of specific investments that should happen in this area, and finally the set of processes that we would like to introduce to avoid like degradation of reliability over time. And I think that is hopefully not super controversial. One more thing that is potentially more controversial is that we would like to get the power to block some feature-oriented contributions from individual SIGs if requested reliability-related improvements won't be addressed by those SIGs. Like the exact what exactly it means is like to be done. Like I don't want to propose anything specific at this point. Like we definitely would like to get, like once we have a more concrete proposals what the criteria for that will be, we will definitely get back to SIG architecture and SIG release and whatever other SIGs you believe should be involved in like approving that decision. But it's something that I think is pretty important to be able to actually enforce the, like being able to enforce that people won't be ignoring the reliability. And I think that's mostly what is in the proposed charter, except from except from like standard boilerplate and yeah, I think we can get to questions and concerns there.
Okay, thanks for that, Wojtek. So I'll first start off by addressing to steering, does anyone have any questions in particular for Wojtek? Dims.
One thought that came to mind while I was reading it this morning was we need to somehow involve the CNCF end user community and try to reach out to the people outside this call. Otherwise, the usual culprits will show up for the meetings, and we need to expand our outreach to make sure that we talk to people outside who are not developers, who are more operators, more product people who run this in their own companies. So I would like some verbiage in the charter for it. That would help, I think, because then we are like, okay, it is in the charter, so we better try to do it. I don't know what form it should take, but we can try out a few things, I think. So that was one thing. The other one was the working group itself. The only previous special superpower that we have is with the scalability SIG, where the SIG is entrusted to revert back stuff, right? Especially in the European time zone when the West Coast is asleep, we should be able to turn things back. So that is the only superpower we have so far as a precedent. Here we are, we need to, when we are talking about it, we need to figure out what does this mean in terms of like, are we stopping things from going from one, alpha to beta? Are we talking about like being able to leave the features switched off? So what are the possible places where we could use this superpower, special powers that you're asking for? That would be one. The other one would be the working group, does it recommend to SIG architecture and SIG release? And basically, what is the communications, and who's going to actually stop things from happening? Like, is there enhancements that needs to be kicked out from a milestone, which is SIG release? If it is, similar to that, like which sub-project of SIG Arch needs to be involved, that kind of stuff. So we need to think through that a little bit more, but I don't think we need to do it at the charter right now. The charter right now, as it is perfectly fine, but I think we need to hash it out a little bit in the initial calls when we get this going. Thank you.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, like, the final proposal that we need before we will be able to block anything definitely needs to address things like under what conditions we can do, what exactly we can do, whether it's kicking an enhancement from the release or whether it's blocking individual PRs or potentially other ideas. I think that this all needs to be fleshed out. And I have something in my mind, but like, it needs to be discussed like in much wider group before we will be able to. So I didn't want to block creating the charter based on that, because I think I don't want to block creating, like, starting the group from doing something useful in the meantime. But yes, I guess it will take at least a couple of weeks to figure out something more specific and something that can actually be approved by others.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Thanks, Wojtek. Derek?
Yeah, a couple questions, if it's okay, Wojtek. So one, thanks for putting together such a concrete proposal. To Dim's comment around special powers, like, I kind of view this document as basically implying a future maybe governance update to SIG Arch itself, right? Like, so just to make sure I understand, do you anticipate the work group dissolving before it exercises these powers, and then just the sub-project of SIG Arch is going to be the one that's actually exercising the power? And if so, maybe Tim's or John or myself could look and see if the SIG Arch charter needs to be updated. So that was my first thought on that. And then the second question was, how frequently are you guys, is everyone intending to meet in the working group? I didn't, or maybe if I've missed what the current cadence is that you're proposing.
Sure, I think it's not yet. Anyway, so to your first question, we are also considering, where we were like briefly discussing it, like we were considering making like production readiness sub-project of SIG Arch to be the one who will be exercising the power, but we will definitely keep you in the loop before we actually open it for like wider approval. I think there are multiple options still on the table. I don't want to like make a decision here because it will be just my opinion. So, but yes, like definitely we want like full SIG architecture buy-in. Like I guess at least all three of you. So you will definitely be in the loop there. Regarding cadence and frequency, for now we will be starting that, like there's no, like the first meeting still didn't happen. Like we we were trying to do it, but like we are still waiting for poll results and stuff like that for what time will work better. But what we are initially at least planning is like every 1 hour bi-weekly. So bi-weekly meetings taking 1 hour. So pretty much the same as SIGARCH, for example, is happening now. And we will, like, after a month or something, we will see if it's enough or we need more, or maybe we need less, which I doubt, at least initially. But yes, we will be adjusting it potentially later.
To just add on to what Tim and Derek said, in the charter, would it make sense to split the special power thing into like that the working group will have might have a special power to block features in the future, and one of the deliverables would be to figure out the process for how that would be done.
I'm fine with that. Whatever like you guys prefer. I think it translates to pretty much the same actions, so it's just a matter like of documenting it differently. So that's fine for me too.
Yeah, speaking for myself, I kind of agree with those comments. Like I'm also just interested in the mechanics of like how, you know, how those feature-oriented contributions are going to be blocked. Like, is that a block at the CAP level in the CAP stage? Is that, are there actually going to be like working with sub-project owners to say like, hey, no, don't merge this particular thing to this directory in KK or something like that? Like, I think there's also some mechanical details around blocking merges, because I don't think that we've necessarily had that explicitly as a lever before. I know in previous, we have, like, it's been levers to block releases that like, hey, this thing needs to be done before we will actually cut a release. But blocking it pre-contribution, pre-merge, or having, you know, or having the power to revert, is it similar to like Scalability's powers there? Like, yeah, I'd be interested in some of the more mechanical details as well, in addition to the criteria that's already called out.
Sure. So we were talking a little bit with like SIG testing folks about that. So, but I think it was back then when we were thinking only at the level of like individual PRs and not like caps or features themselves. So what we were discussing back then, it was actually written in the original Google Doc before I opened this charter. So what we were thinking about it is basically extending or pretty much using like doing that at the sorry, I missed the word. So basically at the merge bot, more or less level, basically by saying that only PRs, like specifying a SIGs that are currently blocked in some way, probably in some like somewhere in some config of Pro, and blocking all the PRs that are annotated with that SIG and like kind that is not like test fix or failing test or flake or regression, like basically blocking features and feature oriented PRs. We would need to extend a little bit to ensure that like every PR has to be annotated with kind and has to, or labeled with kind and has to be labeled with SIG, but I think that's already either happened or is happening more or less. So but yeah, this proposal is like, and it seems that like we were talking with like with SIG testing folks, and it doesn't seem to be much work. But that proposal back then was purely oriented on like blocking PRs, and we may also consider just blocking, for example, feature graduation and not the code itself. So I think I wouldn't take what I said as something that we actually really propose. I think we may change the decision to be cap based or something a little bit different. So this is also why I didn't put the mechanics anywhere yet, because I realized that like blocking PRs may not be the final decision.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think we should probably call that out then, like that, just adding on something to the special powers section, saying like these things in particular, like the mechanics of how we do this has not been decided yet, just so that it's clear that like this is still like an open discussion, because I could see that particular discussion not only involving SIGARC, who's been called out, but also testing and release as well.
Yep, absolutely. Sure, I will.
Stephen.
Hey, so Josh had a question in the chat that I wanted to, since the SIG release chairs are here, I wanted to give a chance to address if possible.
Can you speak it out, Stephen? So for the recording, people can't see the chat, right? So.
No, I'm saying Josh should do that, and then.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I just wanted one of the recent or the current release lead to speak on, because if we're talking about an extra step required to merge things, that's also going to affect the release train. And so, in addition to the details that others were asking for, I'd like to see some details on how this would be coordinated with the release team and or the patch release team, depending on which one is relevant.
Yeah, so I would say from the perspective of like large sweeping changes, whether it be like some of the issue triage stuff that recently came out, we try to do that earlier in the cycle, or we try to coordinate ideas like that earlier in the cycle, and then not action on them unless they're easy to do and not crazily wide sweeping. This would be a huge change, and I wouldn't expect it to happen until at least 121. With regards to blocking merges, we've discussed this for years, right? We've discussed being able to block releases on things like this for years, and I think the gates that we currently have in place are gates that are human gates, right? I would be really curious, and I know that the details were explicitly left out of the proposal. I think partially because we don't know what they would be right now. We've had this discussion so many times throughout the community, and I don't think we've come to an answer. I think that the closest thing that we have to do in terms of blocking merges are pre-submits, right? Like that's our gate right now. Anything that comes into Kubernetes as a result of an enhancement, a KEP completion. There are multiple people working on that at any one time, and there's no guarantee that all of those people are on the same page and are going to do the right things. So we have to have the machines block, and it has to happen at pre-submit.
Go for it.
I have like one quick clarifying question to Stephen. So I agree with what you said basically, but do you have any specific concerns with like how the charters currently how it currently looks like, or is it like more comment for how we should be executing on that later?
Oh, for sure. No, I approve the charter too. I believe in it. I believe in it, and I think it was clever to explicitly leave out details for the implementation that was going to block formation of the group. We testing architecture, this group, and release all have to get together and figure out how to do this, because it's not easy. We haven't solved it yet. So
sure. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. So the first thing that I wanted to say was, how do we know something is going to be reliable or not? Right? It's like only after we check it in, merge it, and then we figure out, oh, this is not working, right? Like, and then we realize, oh my God, we need to either revert or switch it off or do something. Like, so that mechanism itself, I think, I'll be interested in figuring out for sure. But the second one is in the charter. I think what we can do is we can explicitly say that how and where we apply the special powers is still under discussion, and we'll add another document when it is done, and leave it like that, right? So that way the charter can go ahead, and then when the process document gets written, then we can get explicit sign off from all the SIGs and then move on. That will help unblock both. Does that sound like an okay idea?
Yeah, from my perspective, absolutely. Regarding your first comment, I think it doesn't necessarily mean like that we will be blocking a particular feature because we believe it may be unreliable, but it may also mean that like other features that are already there that are owned by a SIG aren't reliable enough, and we want the SIG to address the reliability of already existing features before they actually create a set of new ones. I agree that like preventing checking whether like a new feature will be reliable enough is a little bit more harder, but I think we can do that with like proper processes to things like each feature has to have an SLO, but like I don't want to get into like details probably at this point.
Right. So worst case scenario I can think of is like cron jobs are bad, so we don't let SIG apps merge anything.
Yeah, I think we need a reliable, like reasonable criteria. I don't think we should be able to say something from like 2 years ago or 4 years ago in case of like cron jobs is not reliable. You can't merge anything now. I think it needs to be something like, if your very, very old feature isn't reliable, you have like, I don't know, 2 releases or 3 releases to fix it. And if you don't do it by then we will block something. That's how I think about it. But yes, it's just my personal opinion at this point.
So we would help by quantifying what is the threshold that is going to be acceptable for the work that the SIG is going to do. Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to put a time box on this, maybe like 8 more minutes of discussion today, because there is one other item that I'd like to make sure we have time for. It looks like Aaron and then Derek.
Hey, we get to talk not as a steering member for the first time. So I just, I agree with most of the charter except for the special powers thing. I guess I bristle at the fact that this has been raised a number of times before, the desire to block things. We've never done it. I feel like this is a more specific case of we want to force the project to pay down tech debt. And we need to find a way to incentivize people to do that. I'm not sure if this is the appropriate way. And I also question, like, why is it that reliability is the thing that gets to block stuff? Like, why isn't it security issues, right? Like, why wouldn't we say we're not going to contribute anything else until we've cleaned up the results of the security audit or test flakiness or whatever, right? So I don't want to like have that block the idea that we as a project want to start focusing on reliability. And there are a lot of things that we can add to the project to do this. But I feel like the conversation around how do we focus as a project shouldn't be about a superpower. So I kind of am more interested in how we can help SIG release kind of ship focused releases, or we can focus our contributions there. Yeah, I guess that's all I had to say.
Thanks, Aaron. Derek?
Actually, Aaron, I really like how you captured that. And so I think a lot of the charter I like around documenting what it means to be reliable and measuring our present reliability. I think, you know, I'll have to reflect a little bit on what Aaron noted for jumping right to the carrot and stick is the right outcome or not. But I guess we can iterate on that. The question I just wanted to ask, clarify on is what's the intended scope of the working group? Is it covering that which is covered in cube conformance, or are you intending to measure reliability across every sub-project in the SIGs that may or may not be within what we might think of as conformance? I read this as you're focusing on reliability of that which is exposed in a cube conformance suite, but wanted to make sure that that was an accurate understanding.
I think that's a great question. I wasn't thinking deep about it. So I think at least for the initial, I would say that it should be things that are in conformance, more or less. Yes, I'm fine with making that explicit in the charter. Yes.
Yeah,
we can potentially.
It's like if you do intend to have a stick, right? Oftentimes it's because pockets of interest within SIGs that it can get motivated by particular sub-projects that might be outside of the scope of what you were trying to measure. And to some degree, you're trying to shift attention away from that. And so when we talked about like great merge write powers, it's not meaningful if you can still merge in other sub-projects within your SIG and you're just kind of blocking merging in the KK repo or something like that. So details to work out, but yeah, if you could just add some language there that says where you'd focus, I think that's a great first start.
Yeah, I think Jordan just mentioned me offline that there are beta features that actually destabilize Kubernetes, and beta features are enabled by default. So maybe we don't want to make it like only conformance. Yeah, we probably need to discuss that a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm thinking even like things like, I don't know, SIG scheduling has a descheduler component, right? Are you intending to measure the reliability of that? I doubt it, right? I don't think you'll look at those as a first priority. And so just kind of like clarifying your order. But then if the outcome was that a great superpower is going to be developed to prevent SIG scheduling from checking into the scheduler, but still merge into the descheduler, I doubted that as well. But either way, just focusing on if it's add-ons or the core release binaries is probably sufficient.
Okay, makes sense. Sure.
So one question that I'd like to throw out there, directed towards steering members. We've had a lot of discussion that's focused on the special powers to block merges. Outside of that section, which obviously needs some refinement, is there any other questions or comments or concerns about other parts of the charter? In particular, I'm looking at scoping and stakeholders and deliverables. Taking silence is a good sign. Okay. Got about 2 minutes left if there's any other questions or comments that anyone has. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Wojtek, for attending. Appreciate that. We can take those refinements back to the PR. And if everything looks good at that point, then we can call a vote to look at merging. Dims?
Christoph, do you want to summarize what you would like Wojtek to do to the doc?
Yeah, so my understanding is there's going to be particular revisement around the special powers section, looking towards noting that like mechanics have not been decided. That specific mechanics will probably need to be worked out with testing and release. We're also, it looks like there's still an open discussion point around conformance and what the scope is of like what types of reliability will actually block. merging, if it's only conformance, if it's something outside of conformance. But I think those are like the key takeaways that I had. Is that your understanding as well, Dims?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Wojtek. So we have one last issue that we're going to discuss today. Looks like term limits for steering committee members. Nikita?
Yeah, so just for the record, Paris worked on it a lot more, which she had to drop off. So I'm just going to walk through the PR. So the PR, just drop the link in the chat. Documents term limits for the steering committee. We had discussed this PR in one of the previous steering committee meetings, and we came to the conclusion that what's written as is looks good, but we also wanted to add a few additional things. So right now, steering committee, so like as per the PR, steering committee members can serve only 2 consecutive 2-year terms. So in total, they can serve 2 consecutive terms for 4 years and a lifetime of 4 terms. So like a lifetime of 8 years on the steering committee. We will not be considering the bootstrap committees and the initial election that took place, which nominated folks, which elected folks just for 1 year, I think, and terms that result in equal to or less than 1 year. So this could be due to changes in company, or like someone decides to step down, or for whatever reason. So in those cases, if someone is on the committee for 1 year or greater, their term would be considered in the term limits measurement. But if it's less than 1 year, it won't be. So this is what the previous steering committee had decided. So I just wanted to bring the PR out here in case anyone had concerns, or if this looks good to go. Or what do folks think?
So we had a number of discussions about this in the last term of steering committee, and we had decided that this is probably a good fair bar to set, but that we should probably wait until post-election before putting it in. I think that, again, as we've just brought in 3 new steering committee members, I think we should probably not vote on this today. But I think we should probably add this to our next meeting agenda to actually review and potentially vote on once the new members have had a chance to kind of review it. I think that my opinion, which I've stated before, but I'll just state again to kind of get any conversation rolling on this. The bar that we've set is kind of a mix of like not wanting to basically wanting to give an opportunity for people to fairly serve terms, but also allow the project to set itself up for healthy succession and being able to kind of pass the baton around to different folks. So we have different voices and different representation, kind of like at that highest level of office for the Kubernetes project, just to ensure that we don't get stagnant and people don't burn out. If okay, this is the limit of what I can do, and I need to set something up that in such a way that the decisions that we make as a steering committee can have traction not only with the folks in the seats who made those decisions, but that those decisions can kind of hold over time, and that the project can change directions if it needs to at some point in the future. Any other comments on this today? Aaron?
Yeah, I don't know. If you want to do this after having served 2 consecutive terms, I think you really need the time off for what it's worth. This was part of what factored into my decision to move on, because I just believe like service rotation is extremely healthy for the community. It's really healthy for the individual. So I liked what was proposed here for what it's worth.
Aaron, that's like your vision of Washington's farewell address, and I think it's a great way to end both your terms on steering. So I think that's well said.
Thanks a ton, Aaron, for all your hard work on the project.
+1.
Thank you.
Any other comments on term limits? I'm just looking over the chat. Jordan made a comment that scheduling for next meeting sounds good to give opportunity for context and discussions. Yeah, hopefully we'll be able to do that, because again, when we're changing issues like charters and elections and that kind of stuff for steering, we should definitely have plenty of sober thought on the changes and their potential long-term implications. Okay, if there's no other comments, that brings us to the end of our scheduled agenda. I would like to call out once again, thank you to all the steering committee candidates. Congratulations to the 3 folks that were elected, and an extra special thank you to Aaron and Lockie. Thank you so much for your service on this project. It's been amazing working with everyone, and especially like I like to call it Lockie, who stepped in midterm to fill a gap in our governance. That was really super appreciated, and it's made such a difference over the last 6 months. Yeah, these are, for anyone that is not a regular to this meeting, like these are extremely dedicated, hardworking folks. And they're yes, you get a pension now. Yeah, there aren't enough words to express like how much these folks do for the project. So thank you. With that, if there's no other comments, we will wrap it up for today.
Bye,
Great.
everyone.
Thank you so much. Happy Monday, everyone.